Hello everybody and welcome to another one of my supplemental army painting episodes here. Now I've painted a bunch of these Moria Goblins. I have a handful to finish off, at least of the GW variety. I have a whole bunch of printed ones. We can get into those another time. But I want to finish off this last handful of my ancient, very ancient Moria Goblins here. We are also going to be talking about fluorescent oil paints here. Now, what makes these even more unique, I mean, fluorescent oil's kind of unique, but instead of using actual pre-mixed oil painter, this is from Marion Street. I've used a lot of this. As you can see, we've used a bit of it. I actually discovered not too long ago that you could take these fluorescent pigments from Green Stuff World and mix them with some linseed oil, put them in a jar with an agitator. Not only do you have fluorescent paint, but you've got fluorescent oil paint that is very opaque because this stuff right here, not opaque. So the results are pretty much the same as far as the color goes. But boy, there is a big difference in the opacity. It's just not even comparable. It's unbelievable. Now I'm going to show you some of the other things that we've done as part of the Moria army. The Balrog video that is up on YouTube. A bunch of those other goblins, I painted those in a couple of my Twitch sessions. So yeah, we did mass amounts of goblins on the Twitch channel. Just a little closer look at some of those gobos right there. And what we want to do is mimic some of that object source lighting, but use these because we didn't have these when I did those guys. I do believe some of the very first miniatures I had a chance to use those on were these Diwali trolls. And we'll be doing some more of these trolls. We'll make some videos on these guys. I really love these. It's a 3D print, all one piece, nothing to assemble. And there's two different sculpts, which are really amazing. We've also been doing some more Moria stuff here, even a Moria themed fellowship. So Boromir, Gandalf, we have more of these to do. We'll try and film that process for you as well. What I want to get to is the brands of oil paint that we're using. We talked about the Marion Street, that's the fluorescent. As far as just your regular colors here, we've got these three brands. These two right here, Winsor Newton and Gamlin, those are going to be comparable price-wise, quality-wise as well. They're solid. They're really good. I like them. These are actually two colors we're going to be using, and they're really fantastic. Also not terribly pricey. Now, price-wise, Williamsburg, it's going to be pricier, and outside the U.S. could be a bit of a hassle to get, but the quality is pretty much undeniable. I mean, every paint line has a clunker or two, but it's been pretty astonishing to see what I've been able to get out of that. Brush-wise, mostly craft brushes here. These are from Hobby Lobby. What is it, about $5 for a dozen? And these Royal Langnickel's. Rounds and flats, you'll be seeing us use both of those. See, here's one of my, it's a flat brush that we turned into a filbert brush. And so much dry brushing is involved that, guess what, that brush is going to work out just fine. So I'm going to take you over to the palette here. It's up in the corner there. Now we're going to throw out some of our white here. I don't need a whole bunch of it. Not a whole bunch. That brilliant yellow pale that's next to it, that's going to be doing a lot of the work. So our white, a brilliant yellow pale. Then we've got our cadmium yellow deep here. That is Terra Rosa. Mostly, well, I use it for skin tones, but it can also be used for rust. Then over here, this is another, that's kind of standard. So is this indigo, black spinel, and then we've got our Van Dyke brown over here. This bottom row, also pretty standard. We have Indian yellow over in the corner. We've got our Perline black, which is a very dark green. That's that Winsor Newton color that I was just showing you right there. Prussian blue over here. We have this asphaltum, which is the Gamlin color that I showed you. Very handy as well. Now, these are kind of out here for the purposes of our object source lighting. Fanchon red, that's a Williamsburg color. You could use the fluorescent red too. And I do believe, yeah, you could use this as well. And then you got the fluorescent orange and then the fluorescent orange light. I could also throw the fluorescent yellow out here, but again, I think I'm just going to go with those two fluorescents. And that is these two right here, again, from Green Stuff World. The palette right here is just a piece of parchment paper that is glued to a piece of cardboard temporarily so that I can just peel it off and then use it again later. So I think we need to get into these, right? We need some more goblins here. So what I am going to do is I'm going to do something called a pre-glaze, and that's where we're just going to take some of our darker colors, throw them on here. We're going to wipe those away with makeup sponges, and we're going to talk about that next. We're going to get things started with that pre-glaze, which is going to be almost sort of a multi-phase operation here. We're going to start out with just a bit of our darker colors here. So we've got our perline black. That's kind of a dark green, like we talked about. We've got ourselves a Van Dyke brown over here. We'll let those two sort of mix together. And we're going to mostly focus on top down. This has get a little bit of liquid in it. I've been using less and less and less liquid over the course of time, and just doing it more of a dry brush kind of thing. Now on the base, that could be a different story because the texture is a little bit rougher. We also sometimes will talk about staining colors versus colors that aren't staining. When you hear me talk about that, there are very few oil paints that qualify. And by staining, it means I put some of this on here, and then when I wipe it away with the makeup sponges, how much of it stays behind? If very little of it stays behind, well, guess what? Not really a staining color. If some of it stays behind, especially if we maybe don't have to wait so long, that's a really good staining color. There are some colors that you can kind of wait it out a little bit. Earth tones, for the most part, and by the most part, I mean a good 90+% or more of earth tones, as we had a little bit of indigo into this too. They're just not good for staining. Colors like indigo, the perline black, maybe alizarin crimson, your phthalo green, phthalo blue, your Prussian blue, those are going to be more effective when it comes to that staining effect that we're talking about. And that's, again, you could almost count them on one hand, the amount of things that are good for staining. Now here, we are going to focus more on the Van Dyke brown and black spinel for our floor here. And the floor texture, this is part of the Green Stuff World texture roller. I've done a number of videos using these. We've certainly done a number of Twitch sessions also using these texture rollers. So it's Sculpey Clay texture roller. Again, we won't get into that here. I have so many videos about that. This is more about object source lighting than about the basing itself. So let's, again, stick to the Van Dyke brown and that black spinel. Now, the two colors that I'm using here, they're a little bit of an exception to that whole thing I was just talking about with earth tones not really being a staining color. For whatever reason, this particular Van Dyke brown and the black spinel are very rare. There's other blacks, was it like, I think it's ivory black. Yeah, Zippo with the staining, none whatsoever. And like I said, when we remove some of this paint, you will see what exactly it is that we're talking about in regards to staining. You can also see that we're leaving a portion of these miniatures open for our object source lighting, because that's going to be important. We also don't want to have to fight with paint that's already on here. So that's why we're sort of sticking with these colors into these areas. The other thing too, you're going to notice that, again, that there's a staging to these. We're not just hitting everything all at once. Back in the early days, years ago, I used to just pretty much take burnt umber, or I think it was raw umber, and just do it over the entire figure. And that was it. It's more targeted now. Not always super targeted, but definitely more targeted than it had been. Now, again, on some parts of these bases where there's some rougher texture, maybe I do have to get more of that liquid on there. As far as the primer goes, it's just Badger Stino Res. Mostly taking things like the light flesh color, maybe mixing it with a little bit of the white, and just that's it. Okay, so it's time for the sponges. Makeup sponge here. Latex free, I guess that is the keyword on the sponges. And you can see I've cut these up into a whole bunch of different, well, they end up in different sizes because of the shape of the sponge, right? So, and it's actually handy. I didn't think at first this would be so handy, but it really is. There, let's get to, this is the first one we did, and already it's starting to look a little bit less wet. But check this out here. Look at this. Look what's happening. So it's not just a zenithal. I know everybody does the zenithal stuff these days, but this is more than just a zenithal because you have some color there, and of course, well, we can use that to blend some wet colors in too. So we're also going to get a whole bunch of extra blending out of that. There, yeah. And I do this. It doesn't matter whether it's a gaming piece like this, or if it's a bust or a terrain piece or a display piece, doesn't matter. The process is the same. I mean, there's going to be variations depending on the effect or object source lighting, no object source lighting, that sort of thing. But for the most part, reasonably similar. Look at this. Yeah, just there's already some nifty shading there with not a whole lot of effort. At least I think there is. And you can see I can take some of that away now here, even on the floors. So I don't want this to be like they're walking on lava. Consider it off-camera lighting. So basically lighting that just sort of appears. I mean, they did that in the movies. You never really saw any kind of lava or any where the light was actually the actual light source. It just kind of was coming up from below, because guess what? It makes a really interesting lighting source. Now, I'm also doing this for all of my different Moria dwarves. So all my Khaza-Dhum dwarves are also getting the same basis, same treatment, because, well, it's kind of natural. These would maybe bump into each other once in a while. And it really is interesting with the dwarves and all their armor. So we will certainly be doing a ton of episodes on those guys. Look at that. See? Bam. Does not take very long, does it? Now we have to start thinking about our actual object source lighting here. So what we're going to do is take another one of these. Again, it's another one of the Royal Langnickel here. Now it's time for some of the asphaltum. We'll mix it with a little bit of the Fanchon red. And this is going to give us a nice deep sort of orangey red here. And then we're going to try and wipe this away too. Once we have this established, then it's off to doing stuff like the object source lighting and getting that in position as soon as possible. We, for all intents and purposes, start with the object source lighting. We don't tack it on at the end. Couple of reasons for that. First, some folks, they tend to get a little bit nervous about the object source lighting anyway, and they say, I don't want to ruin the miniature, which usually translates into they never do it because, again, they don't want to ruin the miniature. But if it's already on there, big advantage, right? Also, too, if it's already in place, you'd be surprised. That can save you some time. It really can. I don't know how many times, because I used to sort of, and for all intents and purposes, superimpose that over the top of just the painted miniature. And I realized, oh, yeah, there's about 25% of this thing that I pretty much could have saved myself time not painting. So just did too much painting, and then ended up having to cover over it with the object source lighting. So didn't gain very much there. And that sort of taught me, says, yeah, you know what I should do? So just start with the object source lighting, or at least as close to starting with it as possible. So again, mixing these, I may not paint every single bit of every single dwarf here, or sorry, every single gobbo in this, just to save some time. I mean, they're pretty darn small. So I thought, well, they're small enough. I think we can get through these in a timely fashion. If it's running a little bit long, maybe we'll just condense it to a few. I also wanted you to see how this works over multiple poses, different basing types. Some are a little bit more raised than others. So as you can see, we're just kind of lighting from underneath. You could, in theory, take one of these little sort of party flashlights here and just sort of shine it. This is before, say the light's off or whatever, you could shine it on your miniature, take a picture, and then sort of use that as a bit of a lighting reference. Where is the light actually going to hit? It sounds silly. It looks kind of silly, but it actually does work really, really well. It really does. I've been surprised, I have to say. Definitely been surprised by that. So this one here, I'm going to actually go to the next one here because that other one's going to require a little bit more liquid because of all the rough texture on it. And I'll just save that one for last. Then we'll wipe some of that away. Here, let's make sure we're not missing out on our Fanchon Red here. So again, the Fanchon Red, the asphaltum mixed together. A little bit here on the spear. And of course, these are just 4-point guys base, and I think shield's gonna make them more and spears and stuff, but obviously not the most expensive and costliest of Middle Earth participants. So maybe you just don't want to spend tons and tons and tons of extra time. You spend how much time you have. So we are especially focusing here on the recesses right now. We'll probably darken this down some more, most likely with something like Van Dyke Brown, maybe Van Dyke Brown, some of the Fanchon Red. So we're starting here again with the recesses on this, using a little bit more of the thinner because the surface is very rough and also it's very absorbent. That is really absorbent. Sorry about my voice there. Don't know why all of a sudden, as soon as I try to do something like this, it's fine. And then as soon as I start to do this, then it's not fine anymore. So more of our asphaltum, more of the red here. Just let that get down into these crevices like so. And I think we're, 10 minutes in? Okay, not even 15 minutes so far. And we have ourselves some values established. We even have kind of the first indications of our object source lighting here. Because if you want to have that object source lighting, you better have some shading. Otherwise, it's just going to be object source shading, and that really doesn't work so well. It's not quite the effect we want. We want object source lighting. So yeah, we're just going to continue here. Make sure we have this where we need it, and then we're going to wipe that away, or at least some of it. Now, asphaltum, not so much of a staining color. Fanchon Red, not so much either. Alizarin Crimson could be a different story. Like I said, there are not many of those colors that would get that label of staining. So people give me this list of staining colors. I said, well, you put them. You could pretty much count them on one hand. You might even have some fingers left over. All right, time for our sponges again. And we'll wipe a little bit of that away. We don't want to go too nuts, too bonkers, taking all of that away. It's more about just removing the excess paint because too much paint right away, stuff's just not going to stick. Your next layers will have much more trouble sticking. In many ways, you'll see us practically using a dry brush technique on this. It's pretty important with the oils because, again, too much paint, not gonna go so well. Something we have found out over the many years now of using the oil paints. We got a couple of more of these guys here. We'll just grab a couple more of our sponges. Again, don't want to take too much away here. Want to leave some of that dark behind, but see, now it's not just a dark red anymore. All kidding aside, there could be some folks after we start to add some of the lighter tones here in the next couple of segments. They'll say, "Yeah, that's done. I don't need any more. These are just some stinking goblins right here. We don't need to get any more fancy and crazy than that." And that's all good. It's you do what you need to do, and don't do what you don't want to do. So sponges, poof, there you go. Some pre-glaze, all set and ready to go. So the next thing we want to do is we want to take these fluorescent paints we're looking at over here on the palette, get those on here next, and establish the object source lighting. Let's do that. With some of those darks in place and some of our mid-tones here, let's start to really dig into the object source lighting part of this. And you can see what we had at that set. I was just going to go ahead and finish these things off, and then I realized, you know what? Boy, I think people could really benefit from seeing these, especially these side-by-sides right here. It's essentially the same exact miniature. All right, over here now. This is again, the fluorescent orange. Might throw just a tiny bit of thinner in there. And when we're talking about dry brush, we're not kidding. Dry brush. And the idea is to just sort of take it, and it's a very light brush stroke here. So you can see how it's starting to catch all of those edges there. Again, too much liquid, not going to get a dry brush out of it. But the important thing is sort of go from the bottom up here. And you can see it happens pretty fast, doesn't it? And I usually don't do a whole bunch of it on their feet because, well, that's so close to the ground there. I don't know if there's any object source lighting that would really catch that. You could use your little flashlight trick for sure. Now, as you're doing this, you are mixing some of that color with the pre-glaze. So that's why we have to come back here. We have to get some of the fresh fluorescent orange. This is so much more opaque than the Marion Street oils. The other thing about the Marion Street oils is that they're almost impossible to get outside the US. So I was racking my brains trying to find a fluorescent paint that people could get anywhere. Well, Green Stuff World ships those everywhere. Now, there could be other fluorescent powders, powder pigments that work too from other companies. Here, let's just, so you can see already, starting to get much, much closer there. Now, I have actually a video on the Patreon page that covers all this stuff about mixing the fluorescent powders with the oils. I've done it with metallic powders too, also from Green Stuff World, mica powders, interference powders. So we've quite literally made a bunch of oil paints from scratch ourselves, which is really neat. And it's not all that difficult, and it can be even less expensive than buying the oil paints. And you're far less prone to having to worry about, well, oh gosh, where am I going to get this stuff? Yeah, look at that. I mean, huh? Oh, does it get much more effortless than that? You have a lot of these guys to do, right? You're probably going to have somewhere between 30 and 50 of them. And believe it or not, and I know I've heard people say this, well, object source lighting takes way too long to paint a whole army. You can't do that. I said, seriously? This army has taken a tiny fraction of the time to paint because I can just, for all intents and purposes, cheat. It's like cheating with object source lighting. There's a part of me that's tempted to actually title this episode "Cheating with Object Source Lighting." I don't know. I might just do that. I might just do clickbait titles. See what happens. But it's sometimes, well, the oil paints period just feel like I'm stealing time, because I am. I'm getting time back that I ordinarily would have had to spend doing some more laborious type stuff. I don't have to do that. I mean, look at this. It is. We're just dry brushing this on it, and it's coming from a fairly consistent direction, so you don't have to think. You don't have to really think very hard about it. It's not super stressful. In some ways, the brush. Look at. I got 2 fingers on the brush. I don't even have a third finger. All I'm doing is just scraping it across this way. Now, I am going to be doing more things with these guys because we're looking for a higher level. But there could be folks that after they see this, just this part right here, they say, yeah, that's good enough. That's like what, an hour? Less maybe for five object source lit gobos. I'm good with that. I'm all good with that. I try to do this on kind of all of my videos. That's why the running time tends to be somewhere around 100 to 120 minutes, because that tends to be the average person's work session. And that might only be one of those a week. But I kind of did some asking around. And when I sort of took the average, that was about what we came up with. It was around a couple hours max for a typical painting session. So I try to do as much as I can in that particular time frame. In an episode, showing you every single brushstroke. There's maybe times it's not super practical because you just can't see it where it is on the miniature. But there's a reason why I don't just kind of cut away or speed ramp or anything like that, because I want you to really see what the heck is going on, because sometimes there's an area that's a bit tricky, and you need to know that if you don't see that and you all of a sudden run into that tricky area, so oh, wait a minute, why was that so easy? It looked so easy on the speed ramp video. Why is it so hard for me? So I realize these videos end up being longer, but that is why. Well, a few of the reasons why anyways. So again, we're doing our under lighting here. Not going to do it up there. How's that light supposed to get up there anyways? But bam, I mean, object source lighting, yes. And we've only just started. Now, as far as cleaning brushes go, we'll just take ourselves a paper towel right here. Or, we can, I mean, you could use brush cleaner on this, but why? We're just going to grab a slightly lighter shade of our orange. And the brush cleaner is the Winsor Newton. I mean, it doesn't have to be Winsor Newton, I guess, but look at this. It's also for dried acrylic too, and it's not hazardous and there's no vapor. I wouldn't suggest, maybe sipping on it a couple times, but you're probably not going to do that. And it works really, really well. I'm very impressed with it. I really like it a lot. Okay, now let's see what happens here with some of our slightly lighter orange. Oh my goodness. Because in the past, the other thing too, I would have to use something like cadmium oranges and cadmium yellows, which is fine, but they're pricey and they will take longer to dry than this. This stuff is definitely faster drying than the cadmium. So another advantage, and not so much like it's got alkyds in it fast. It will dry at the same pace of all the other colors. Whereas cadmiums, if you have like those Diwali trolls I showed you, if I had done lots of cadmiums there, that area would not have dried at the same rate as, say, the bodies did. So you can see we're already starting to get ourselves a decent amount of lighting here. And this is not the lightest we can go. Yeah, this is not the lightest we can go. We can certainly go lighter than this, but sticking with that very soft, dry brush. Again, 4 point. What that's right there. 4 cent goblins. Yes, they are 4 cents. I believe with no equipment, they are 4 cents. This is we're not supposed to be talking about cent values, are we? So there, we won't talk about that anymore. All right, but what we are going to do is continue to add our lighter colors, and you can see all the darker tones that we added. Now they're really setting up all of our nice light tones for sure. And this is a number 4. It's one of those Royal Nickels, just one of those flat brushes. I think, yeah, we never did get this part over here. We'll continue this way. And, see, that's the fun thing now that I have my darks established. I don't necessarily have to go super light everywhere. So we got, actually, well, oh, I was like, how did I get 6 of these? That's my painted one. He just sort of ended up in the mix. We'll get him out of the way there. That see how fast these guys were starting to look like they had some finishing qualities to them. They were already getting mixed up with a guy that was done months ago. Oh, and that's the other thing too, is that other figure or these other ones that are in the references here and stuff. Those were painted months ago on the Twitch channel. So I don't even remember. I couldn't tell you exactly what I used and exactly what place because, well, I certainly didn't use these. I didn't have these yet. I try to emphasize that too. You don't have to have the exact same colors. First of all, nobody's going to care. Believe me, as somebody who has done many tournaments in many different systems, nobody's going to look close enough to know that one guy is not exactly like the other guy. They're just not that curious, and they also don't have that much time, and the lighting is really terrible. So they're not going to, even if they wanted to see, they may not really, they might look for that. They won't be able to tell because the lighting is just that hideous. It's that dark, it's almost like Moria. I think Moria is better lit than most tournament rooms, or at least most hotels. All right, so there's your object source lighting established. We're not going to go any further than that with the object sourcing because now we got to go back the other way and do the non-object source lighting stuff. Establish some more darks in here, and then here too. But like here, see we have light, and then we need to darken that area down. But we're going to do that next. And we're going to be doing some dark glazes, more of our dry brushing. And I think that's going to make our object source lighting stand out that much more. So let's get to that next. As you can see by our painted example over here, we have some darks to add. Just a few darks. Also, a few different colors as well. So what we'll do is we'll just do some little, maybe almost like pin line wash slash glazes of, we got some indigo here. A little bit of that black spinel. And let's just drop this onto the hair. Not too much of it. We're probably going to have to get... Yeah, I'm going to do that on some of these guys here, some of the armor, and then we'll swing back around and we'll get some of our darker reds in place too. We need to kind of divide that in half. We need our hot zone and our cool zone. We got some here on this guy, I think. Not tons of definition on these guys for sure. I mean, they weren't super spectacular figures practically 20 years ago, and they're certainly not super these days, but it is what it is. I do like a lot of the printed ones. You can see some of the printing goes ever on goblins that I've done on my Twitch channel there, and there's links in the description, so you can go check those out. And all my Moria stuff has all been painted. Wow, this is the first of my Moria stuff that was not actually painted live on stream. Yeah, I was trying to think, did I paint any of it not on stream? No, all of it has been painted live. So this is the first of the non-live painted miniatures here from a Moria army, including a big old Moria dragon, which I forgot to put in my opening pictures there. Yes, a big old Moria dragon. Now, it was a Reaper dragon that was sort of modified to work. Made a nice, really nice Khaza-Dhum style base for it, just like the ones we've got here. All right, there's our indigo. This one for sure could use some of the dark there. There's even, I guess, a little bit of a chainmail on him almost. Now I'm going to take some of the Van Dyke Brown here. See if we can give him some darker glazes on his clothes. Maybe even a tiny hint of the asphaltum there. We could, in theory, also use our makeup sponges to wipe some of this away. We say, you know what, just went too crazy with the brown, and just wipe some of it away. So I'm going to grab me another makeup sponge here. Just bear with me for a second. So almost like a second pre-glaze, whatever. You could do something like that too. Going to make sure that we also get our darker tone on top of that spear so we can sort of cut it in half, right? We have the object source lit part on the bottom, and then our ambient light, such as it is, on the top. Okay, I think this one mostly did there. And I'm going to take a little bit of my Fanchon red with the asphaltum, and you can see I'm just touching the brush there. That's really important. You can't brush on something like this because all you'll do is just wipe away your original layer of paint. So we're just essentially touching the brush to it, and we let it flow. I know that can be a little bit scary to just let the paint do what it's going to do, but it works very, very well. Because you need to have these strong darks. You don't have these strong darks, there's otherwise you'll just have to make your lights so intensely light that it will be like they are they are practically just on fire, and that's pretty sure that's not what we want. We would like them to be darker, but not completely on fire. So again, we'll darken down his outfit here a smidge, maybe the top of his spear right there. And it was, in some ways, it was even hard to tell what's what. What is flesh? What's armor? What is clothes? Again, these are not, they weren't super detailed miniatures at the time. And of course, by comparison now. So here is a printing goes ever on goblin right here. This is one that I printed out myself, and it was shocking the kind of details that were on this. Of course, no mold lines or anything, and that's from the printing goes ever on. And I've done a lot of their goblins, and wow, I'd never painted goblins with so much detail before. It was pretty wild. Okay, we're going to darken up this sleeve a little bit here. Now, let's say you wanted these guys to be more of a bluish tone. Well, maybe we do this with Prussian blue instead of the Van Dyke brown here. If you wanted them to be green, you could make them green where there's not the object source lighting. And I love doing the object source lighting I'd have it on every single one of my armies if I could, but it doesn't always necessarily, it's not always the best theme for some armies. For Moria, it was kind of hard, and that's whether it's Khaza-Dhum or the Gabos themselves. It's kind of hard to just not think that object source lighting would be really handy on these guys here. Really make it look appropriate. So again, we'll throw some darks in here. I'm going to go back over here to the asphaltum. See, there's an area that just didn't get any paint at all. And it happens sometimes, especially here when I'm trying to, there's a lot of things to balance while you're shooting a video. Sometimes a little section gets missed. So there's some of the darks established now. I'm going to go back over here and check on this guy. So see here, that probably shouldn't be getting that much light. That should be darker there. So I made a little bit of a switch. No, nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with making a little bit of a change. You look at something, you see it, say, you know what? Probably shouldn't quite be like that. So again, here's another area where there just wasn't a whole lot of color to begin with. Adding these darker tones here, just it enhances the lighting quite a bit. Now we could also, I got this brilliant yellow pale. I might let a little bit of my perline black get in there. Once again, it is very much a dry brush. It's the same kind of dry brush that we used to do our lighting, but now we've kind of changed it around. We're using a cooler color. This is more your ambient light color. And you'll see that it just really doesn't take much time. Look at this, even on the floor. Almost looks like some of that light's being cast onto the floor itself. But this color is relatively dark, and I can't emphasize it enough. That brush has got to be dry. Very little paint here. Not much paint at all. I'm going to actually swing back around to this one and get some light there. Again, brilliant yellow pale, a little bit of that perline black. Just a smidge of that. It is going to pick up the darker colors along the way. We talked about that. Just got to be ready for it. And this is by no means a highlight color. This is what you call a midtone. It's that it's the gray area between dark and light. If you, let's say you take your value scale, you divided it 1 through 10. 1's the brightest, 10's the darkest. We're playing around with 5s and 6s here. On your metals there, maybe your brightest highlights, that might be where you get to a 1. Pretty much everything else, like the skins and stuff, maybe even the clothes, you might get to a 2 for your brightest highlight. Everything else, you want it to be a little more subdued. You want your also too the brightest highlights to be your orange stuff. Now what's interesting is that the orange, while it appears really light as far as, it might be a value 1 and everything else is more like a 3 or 4. We'll do something later where we just take basically the saturation and we take it all away, and all you see is black and white. And that's where you'll notice that this is not actually super light. It's not as light as you think it is, or as it appears to be, because you're comparing it to all the intensity of this orange. So you have, there's lots of different saturation. You got obviously your light and dark. Everybody thinks about that. What they don't think about is warm versus cool. And here, let's show one of their buddies again. These are cooler colors, but they're also far less saturated. This is super saturated and super warm. So that's two types of contrast we've thrown in there. Two types of bonus contrast. Again, now here's another thing too. We'll talk about brushes here. These are about $4.50 a piece on average. Now you got spotter brushes and you got liner brushes. Now I tend to prefer the liner brushes for a few reasons. One of them is they just tend to be more rugged. They tend to be more rugged. They tend to just take more of a beating. Now what I'm going to do here is maybe mix a little bit of indigo with this white, because this is more for things like the armor here. Because again, we're trying to get into the non-object sourcelet surfaces here, seeing things of the armor here. Do we really want to get, how much lighter do we want to get here with this? So you can see again, not a whole lot of paint. This is still not value, that value 1, we're not using value 1 here. It's maybe a 2. Somewhere around a 2. I'm not even going to think about doing anything lighter than that until I've seen what my object source lighting looks like. Now their skin tone, I could maybe throw some yellow in with this. And then we have more of that orky green. That's probably the Indian yellow is what I would use for that. So see, just again, catch a couple of edges on the top of him there. And we'll just move on along here. Because the segment after this one, that's where we'll see, can we really find out what our lightest object source lighting is? Go from there. So this is our armor here. We have to figure out, okay, that side will be the lighter side. Other side's going to be more the shadow, but we will need some touches of reflected light there. I'm also going to strengthen the edge there a little bit. Yeah. Tone that down a little bit. The other thing you can do with the oils, you see that kind of a nice little bit of free blending we just got there. Didn't have to work too hard on that. And I do hope that as people watch this, they say that this is real time, right? This is not speed ramped. So they say, okay, yeah, this is 5 of these guys with all of the object source lighting, with the base, all that kind of stuff. And we're talking about potentially only a little over an hour from start to finish. Again, no cutaways, nothing like that. Just everything. And while it might take more time on other armies, say, you got 1,000 Sun Space Marines, like, well, this. Well, this was one of my army painting series. I think I painted 10 of these guys, including the sorcerer, and of course, a little bit fancier on the bases there. But even that took far less time than when I was painting Thousand Suns long ago with the acrylics, using some of the very much older methods that I used to use. So that just doesn't take long to establish typical metallic, or sorry, non-metallic look. We also do paint metallics with the oils, so yeah, it is possible. We have certainly mixed up our own. I've done it on Rivendell Knights, Gondor. I do believe some of those are on the YouTube channel as well. I know I did a Patreon video on one of the Rivendell Knights, again painted with the metallic oils. Is that metal? Can't really tell. That should probably be not orange there. One more of our goblins here. Then I'm going to see about the skin tones. See if we can't maybe drop some greenish color into those skin tones. Because it looks like he's got bare feet there, so that would be a good spot. I think he's got, yeah, his arms here too, so I think there's a couple areas we could maybe show off. Some of that greenish, warmer greenish skin tone, but first I want to get the last of my cooler colors here on the metals. Let's see, yeah, Indian yellow here. And we'll just let that mix with our green. And back to the brilliant yellow pale over here. So that's a much warmer green than you saw for, say, the armor. Get his hand here on his feet. Yeah, he does have bare feet there. You can see we've thinned this paint down a smidge. Also a little bit of fuzz there on the end of the brush. We haven't thinned it down to the same degree. Remember the pin line wash, essentially, that we had done in the other segment? Not to that degree, because then it'll just kind of go all over the place. We don't need it going all over the place. I mean, we could even use some brown shadows in the skin tone here. There's a lot of different things we could do. It becomes all up to you what you wanted to do. Okay, that's all metal right there, so not any skin tone on that. But I think you can see how the object source lighting sets such a strong light and dark pattern just kind of by itself. You can see how we don't have to do as much with everything else. Your eye is so drawn to all of those nifty colors. Is there anything? Oh, his ears. Aside from that, it's about it. And we might get a little bit lighter with some of our skin tones there. We also have to add some darks in a couple places. Got their eyes too. And this last guy, well, he's got a mask. So don't have to do too much there. We'll just throw a little bit of that green on his hands there, but a lot of it just let it mix. Sometimes you just have to let things mix together. Okay, let's see if we can do a little bit of that brilliant yellow pale here. And we will lighten up that flesh tone. Some of his fingers here. Back of his hand. This guy, his ears, a couple of places on his face. Just here around his eye there. This guy, same thing, just a couple of spots. Do we have anything on his face? I'll try and put a little bit of eye right there. More of our lights on his ear. Lights on the faces. A little bit on his arm. Not so much on his hands. Okay. Eye ridges, not really eyebrows, but his eye ridges, maybe on his hand there. Little toes for him here. His ear on this side. And I don't know about this is part of it is kind of the lighter skin tone, but also I'm thinking I'm going to see if I can't get there some eyes for these guys too. Especially these guys here where you can see the eyes. End of his ear, his eye over there. We could put tattoos on him. There's all kinds of wild and crazy things that you could do. Ears on these guys. Some eyes for him. And you, I think we already have some of our lights on him. We have to sort of create the fingers where there's no fingers. Do we have the ear? Now we've got the ears there. Okay, so next up, we need to start putting some of our lightest lights here with our object source and kind of refine that a bit. Also might involve putting some darks back in a few places. So let's do that next. Before I jump into those lightest lights, there's some darks that I want to come back in here with, mostly just to sharpen some edges, not really to do much else. And that's going to mostly be our Van Dyke Brown and the Asphaltum mixed together here. And it's just about a little bit of sharpness here. See, that should be actually dark right there. This will get a decent amount of liquid and not so much, again, that it's a pin line wash. But just enough to make sure that it flows, just enough to make sure that it actually sticks. I might even use it here above his eye to create more of a ridge right there. Maybe something a little bit more there. So the stronger we make these, the stronger our lights will appear without having to maybe make those quite as light. Always a good thing. I know there's always the rush to highlight. When in fact your better idea is to, when in doubt, make things darker. It's usually better to make it darker first instead of rushing to highlights, mostly because there's almost always room to make something darker. Once you've used white, you got nowhere to go. You can see with the darks, you could play around with warms and cools. There's other things that you can do to generate up some contrast besides just immediately going bam to that lightest color. So think about adding some darks now and then instead of just kind of rushing towards full steam ahead towards the highlights. Again, we might have to also, I'm going to come back around with one of my other more heavy duty brushes, I think, and try and glaze in some darker tones in the base area here. And trying to maybe create some hair over here. What about our last couple of guys? See this one, I can see some areas there where I really wanted to get some of this dark. like that. Probably a little bit over here too. Again, it's about that separation. There's a lot of little tiny armor plates here, and instead of highlighting every single one, it might be best to come back in with some darks and darken some of those, and let the object source lighting be a suggestion. Okay, do we have that good? And I think that is gonna have to be good enough. Tone even some of those lights down. Okay, now I'm gonna come back over this way. We have, here's some of our fluorescent yellow. Now you're gonna see what happens here. As soon as that brilliant yellow pale hits it, it sort of turns it, it's not quite yellow anymore, or orangey. So I'm going to see if I can grab a little bit of my Indian yellow here. And now it's back to a little bit more of a yellow color. It's also that much more opaque. I could also do this with the cadmium yellow here too. But every time you add the cadmium yellow, you're adding a little bit of drying time to it. Just, it's a thing to keep in mind. Get that fuzz off of the brush. And now we can, especially on the metal parts here, that's a fun area to really take advantage of some of your object source lighting. Surfaces like the skin and the cloth, it might not always be the best for those light highlights, because now they look as hard and as reflective as your metal does, and that's probably not gonna, it's just not gonna look like metal at all. And oh, by the way, this is not even the lightest orange that we can do. We can certainly go lighter than this. Now look at it next to the white. You can see we have not gone to white yet in any way, shape, or form. There is no pure white on this thing anywhere, not even close. So say for little bits of armor and such, we can definitely come back with white or something like that if we really feel like we want to bring out just that tiny little bit edge of an armor piece. And I usually do that in kind of like my last little segment. We just call it final details, and it sort of just covers a bunch of different things. Covers lots of different stuff. Sometimes last little bit of freehand, or maybe some follow-up work on the bases or whatever. Again, I don't want to do too much down on the bottom of the feet because, well, how in the world is the light reaching that? Trying to focus on the areas where the light would certainly reach it. This one's going to have a wee bit more, especially because we have that little skelly friend over here. We'll probably darken down the top of that skelly friend as well. And we're probably going to get some more darks into the base here. And these, well, all of these figures, all of my Lord of the Rings stuff, it is all meant to be played with. It is absolutely none of it. The Balrog, all that stuff you saw, that is meant for playing. That is not meant for just sticking in a cabinet somewhere never to be seen. It is most definitely meant to get used. These guys, they are most definitely meant to be used. It's going to be, I'm trying to save up for the right type of camera, I think, that's going to help me most as far as filming battle reports with these. But we're essentially creating one, at least one, of every army in Middle-earth, because we want to actually do basically a war in Middle-earth campaign where it's the whole thing. I mean, we could be fighting pretty much anywhere, not just Moria. Could be the war in the north. You could see Corsair ships trying to attack the Grey Havens. It all kind of depends. I'm also going to be painting some of the War of the Ring board game figures, which are even tinier than this and have, guess what, way less detail than even these gobos do. And there's 140 of those, not including the Warriors of Middle-earth expansion. So I'm hoping to have lots more content for you guys, not just the painting side of things for Lord of the Rings, but also lots of gameplay. All right. Yeah, let's bring in a couple more of our lighter highlights on the underside here. What's going on with this? I think we need the underside. Yeah, we need to get a little light on the underside of that. So we're talking about the little skelly friend there. Might need to get some dark on top of that so that he looks like he's lit from underneath. So see, right away, all of a sudden, now he's starting to look a little bit more like he's lit from underneath. Let's get to our next little gobbo friend here. And these are figures that we got when, Lord of the Rings first came out as a system. These go back to the earliest days. A lot of the figures that I painted are, say, from the Two Towers box set or from the, the Return of the King box set. There's some old figures, which is interesting then to see all the 3D printed figures side by side with those, and then of course all the new stuff that GW is starting to do. I also have the Easterling. I just call them the ninjas, but I think they are the Dragon Cult Acolytes or Black Dragon Acolytes. I've got, I think, a half a dozen of those to paint up, so we'll be doing some of those for the channel here too. In my Easterling color scheme, which is a wee bit different than what you normally see. Huge surprise, I know. So yeah, look at that. We can still go actually much lighter than this with our orange. One thing I will say, when you've got, say, the fluorescent paints like this, and then you start to throw in some of your kind of opaque colors like the brilliant yellow pale, the cadmium yellow, and then the white, it can start to thicken up the paint a little bit. Now you can, with the oils, get away a little bit with thinning down the paint, because thinning them down, unlike acrylics, it's not going to dilute the paint. You pretty much cannot dilute the oil paint. You can thin it, you're not going to be able to dilute it. That's just a little something to keep in mind. Once it's cadmium yellow, it's always cadmium yellow. You can practically make a pin line wash out of cadmium yellow. I've certainly done it in some places, actually, to have like an internal glow. Instead of trying to paint all that stuff in, I'll just kind of do it as a pin line wash. Okay, let's get the edges of our base there. And then I'll just be hitting the edges of the base with the black like you would normally do. Nothing super fancy about that. So you can see, again, really focusing in on the metal surfaces, or just areas that would be very obvious for picking up some of that light. And you also notice too, we're not making a lot of necessarily lines there. We're trying to have more shapes. And the other thing I try to stick with is these short, almost dots of highlights, as opposed to edge highlighting. because that's not really a metallic type of thing, edge highlighting. It's more like these spots of light where just a few pinpricks of light kind of hit the surface. Let's get the light on this side. And all that leaves us with now is going to be some of the lightest of our orange here. We have a little bit to do on the base in a few areas. Brilliant yellow pale. Some of that Indian yellow, because that's a really intense. Make sure I have a little bit of my fluorescent orange in there. And you can see we're getting a little bit more of the thinner in here. Why? Because thin paint sticks to thicker paint. And we got some seriously thick paint on there now. And this, we could still go a little lighter than this, actually. This is still not even the lightest color we could put on here. I haven't even gotten to straight up brilliant yellow pale yet, which still is not even as light as your white is. Okay, so again, focusing on the stuff that's facing towards where our light source is. So you can see we didn't do the entire surface of that, just that little bottom dot there. And we'll have to do the same thing on the flip side of it where the ambient light is coming down. Yeah, but that's what we'll do in our final, kind of a final details thing, is we'll get some of those brightest lights, maybe work a little bit also too on the stone floor. Whatever details might need to be worked out of that too. Now, of course, you guys, when you're doing your video, you can actually be listening to some Lord of the Rings music, or heck, you could even, I guess, have the movies on while you're doing this. That could be a nice little source of inspiration and ideas too. I also have the art of the movie books there, and I've looked at some of that for some of the costumes to see the costumes in what, like, regular light as opposed to just the special filters and the lights that they used in the filming part of it. So you can see how that gets, yes, you can get actually brighter, more intense than the light we had there. Again, not so much on the cloth, thinking things like the spear point there, bits of armor here, that kind of stuff. Now we've got this guy with all kinds of areas. I think that we could put some of our lightest yellow on here. It's nice to do these guys that are raised up a little bit. I don't care, and none of the people that, if I was going to be playing with them, they wouldn't care if a guy is higher on a base than another guy. We don't care about the whole, what is that, modeling for advantage? Boy, do I hate that expression, because all I want to do is make bases that look interesting to me. I don't care if it could be disadvantageous, and there are times where I've made bases that were most certainly disadvantageous to me. When it came time for the system, I didn't care. So if I'm going to be spending all this time painting these, and, well, there's also the expense involved too, so I'm just going to do the way I want to. I don't really care. Mostly because none of the folks that I would play with would ever have that kind of thought process. And if that happens at a tournament or something like that, well, you just chalk that up to whatever. Last guy with our lightest lights here. It's another one where we have plenty of these armor plates that are pretty well exposed to some of, well, our lightest kind of firelight there. Or is it Balrog light? Since you gotta be really darn close to the Balrog with these guys to keep his 12-inch security blanket, might as well have him casting some light on these guys too. And just a couple of our lightest lights on the underside of that metal there. And that is that. Okay. So we're just going to try and do a couple little final details. Maybe some stuff here on the bases, other highlights somewhere, maybe the even couple of bright highlights on the metals. And that's it. So let's finish off our final details next. It's time for some of those final details, and probably some of those final and details are going to involve some highlights here. I'm going to start this off the easy way, figuring out where some of my brightest metal highlights should go. So see that? See how that gives it that nice little shiny point there at the end? It wasn't a solid line that went the whole distance. It was just a little point. Same thing here. See that? It's just a little point at the end. Same thing on the spiky bits here of his helmet. That's what's going to give it the metal look, not so much the continuous, long, solid edge highlight. We will do that over here too, along the ridge line of this armor. Maybe even a little reflected light down there. We could even take something like the Terra Rosa and put rust on this if we felt like it. I mean, it's all up to you. It's whatever it is you want your army to look like. But bam, look at that. Did that take terribly long? Not really. And I haven't done anything on these guys that you have not actually seen. There has been nothing here painted off camera. You've seen every last brushstroke that I've done. And we're talking about some decent looking figures here for somewhere in the neighborhood of an hour, maybe a little bit longer. But that's your object source lighting. That's non-metallic. All the things that you're not supposed to be able to do with an army, especially not a mass army like the Gabos here. So I hope this is also kind of helps to maybe entertain that notion of, yeah, I can still do things like the object source lighting and actually get armies done perhaps even faster. Because think of all the skin tone and metals, and there's probably leather and stuff. I just didn't even have to paint that on here. I said, the heck with it. I'll just make it object source lighting. Who the heck cares? It saved so much time. Because that's all I could, well, then I could have maybe done some more things with weathering or rust or something like that. But I mean, it's all, every one of those effects is going to take more time. There are actually some like little bits of metal there. Now here on the visor should probably be some reflected light there. The fletching on those probably is more black than anything else, but let me see if I can just grab some indigo over here. Yeah, just a little smidge of reflected light down there. Where's my little, we're just going to use this as a kind of a micro blending brush right here. And that's it. Now I am going to see if I can find my, here it is. I looked at this and we never really did this to get our bluish gray tones onto that part of the stone floor. And it may look bright, but it is most definitely not bright. It's just one of those that I kind of forgot to do that, and this one I think I could use a smidge more there. Now we'll head back over here to our lighter, wait, but I also have to make sure that I add a little bit of that thinner to it to lighten it up here, or to make it a bit thinner so that it's going to apply a little bit more evenly. I have to maybe give them some kind of highlights in the hair. I think the mold lines sort of force me to wipe out what was there as far as the detail goes. So we'll have to paint some of that back in. And I also might add some Van Dyke Brown over here. So let me just get my couple of highlights there. And yeah, some of the Van Dyke Brown here. Heck, maybe even a smidge of that asphaltum. So it's kind of a grayish, reddish brown. That might be a little too light. Maybe a little more of the Van Dyke Brown here. So now it looks like maybe he's got a actual shirt over the top of his armor there. So we can lighten that up a smidge now too. So that's, again, final detail type stuff. Once I've seen what I need to everywhere else, then I can kind of come back and do those smaller details. Other advantage of that too is let's say you can't paint all these in one session or whatever. You know, you take these 5, you do these 5, another session, do another 5 or something like that. Well, you know, I can maybe leave some of this, like this brownish stuff here. Maybe I just leave that for the next session. Maybe it's not that important. Maybe just getting these things out of the way and on the table for a little test game or something is more important. As far as the dry time goes, since I've really tried to stay away from the cadmiums as much as possible, we're looking at drying times here that could be as little as 12, 14 hours. When you get into more of the cadmiums now, you could be looking at some 18, maybe even some 24-hour dry times. But you kind of plan for that. You just realize that's going to happen. It's going to take a little longer to dry. You plan for it as best as you can. Back to our lightest light color here in a couple of places. I don't know if I necessarily want that fletching to be super bright. There's so much more that I have to add to this Moria army. I have a Watcher in the Water. That's another 3D printed piece. I've got the, I think they're the Warg Marauders, right? I've got some of those. So there's much more that will be added to this army. And I will try to make sure that you guys get a chance to see that. And then, of course, get to see this, well, play some games too. I said it earlier. This is not meant to just sit in a box somewhere. This is meant to be used. Hopefully many, many times, as are all my other Lord of the Rings armies. Gonna lighten up the bottom of this too. A few more lights up here, just to have them. I'm gonna see what happens here. I'm gonna try and get a couple of lights on the corners there of the armor pieces. All right, the quiver here, that's some of our asphaltum mixed with the white. That does make a good kind of dusky skin tone. I've used that on my Harad, the Brilliant Yellow Pale, and the Asphaltum. I did an army painting series on my Harad army. And I've been adding some more of those on the Twitch channel as well. All right, I'm going to see if I can't put some reflected light in there that's also a little bit just more orange. I might also need some of my lighter orange here on his fingers that are holding the bow. I mean, I could have also done some darker stuff there, but what the heck, we'll just have it be the lighter color there too. All right, now let's see what I can do. I'm going to take a look at some of my older ones here and see what did we do. See how we brought out a little bit more of the details there. I will stir it out with the Van Dyke Brown here. This is, again, pretty well thinned. And maybe, again, restore some of the darks here in the floor. Maybe even as a bit of a pin line wash. I might actually take some of my indigo, get that in there too. I don't want it to just be all the brown. See how that got sucked into all the little edges right there? I'm going to get this thing out of the way because, again, I'll grab it and go to put some paint on it or something like that I don't want to do. Now this edge here I am going to darken like that. Okay. We'll do the same here. Yeah, see here some of those edges could use some dark. A lot of that could. Again, the darker this gets, the lighter our object source lighting gets without having to highlight the heck out of it. That's really important. I think this is another one that needs a lot of that same kind of treatment here. See, we bring that dark closer to the edge. You can see I'm also using the liner brush on its side. It all of a sudden becomes a much larger brush. And it also does hold a fair amount of liquid and pigment. You can see that. You can see I'm not doing that absolutely everywhere. See how I leave some areas exposed there. And then we'll come back in kind of our last little bit. And we will do some of our, I don't want to say highlighting of the dwarf texture pattern. Again, that is a Green Stuff World texture roller. I will throw some links in the description to some other videos where we're using the Green Stuff World texture rollers. I have tons of Patreon videos that use them. We have also done basing sessions on the Twitch channel also that use the Green Stuff World texture rollers, all different types. There's sci-fi, fantasy, obviously some things that are really good for Lord of the Rings too. Okay, now we're back into our, here I'm also going to get a little bit of the indigo into that so it's a bit more neutral. Also maybe not too light. And I'm just going to, I don't want to do every single bit of the pattern here, just a few areas. Just to bring some of that out. Not every last bit of it. We also have to think in some ways he could even be casting a shadow on the floor itself too. So another thing to consider. I know we did that with the trolls because, well, they're kind of on the larger side and makes sense that they would be casting shadows. So see, we just were able to get a little hint of some lighter colors there. I'm going to grab this guy now. You can see the advantage of working on multiple miniatures. It does something that I like to go, it just slows you down a little bit, because with the oils, you can be tempted to actually just go too fast because you're mixing paint, you're having all kinds of fun, it's going great. And then the next thing you know, you've kind of gotten a little bit too far out over your skis. You got too much paint in an area, and then it kind of leads to some disaster. Working on multiple figures keeps you from getting just too bogged down into one area, and for all intents and purposes, mixing it to death. You can also see here how this is a lot lighter. We didn't just go one stair step lighter, did we? We didn't really do much of that at all in any of these things, in any area, whether it was the object source lighting, whether it was the skin tone, the armor. We kind of went big, right? We didn't just go small. That is important. That's very important to keep in mind. So again, here we're trying to bring out a little bit of this pattern here. We kind of went in with our dark, and of course, what is this? What is this not? It is not white. This is by no means white. It's maybe about a value 3-ish. Maybe about a 3. Again, using that 1 to 10 scale, with 1 being the lightest and 10 being the darkest. So I hope that this has been helpful, gives you some ideas. Like I said, I've got, well, was it 900 hours worth of videos on the Patreon page? So there's plenty more there that obviously takes us into far deeper coverage for sure. And there is a link to that in the description as well. That $15 Army Painter pledge, it gets you basically every single video that I have ever made, going all the way back to 2013. Now you know why there's 900 hours of videos, because that is 8 years worth of terrain tutorials, basing tutorials, object source lighting, and there's a bunch of acrylic stuff too. It's not just oil paints. In fact, the vast majority of it is actually acrylics. So for folks that are saying, I don't really want to get into the oils, no problem, because there's tons of acrylic content on there. And I still add acrylic content even today. It's not like it's just old stuff, because not everybody uses oils. There's even some things where I'll take a figure that's partially painted with acrylics and then finish it with oils, or vice versa, just in case people want to see that. All right, there we go. All right, that is one way, I think, right, to get yourself a whole batch of Moria Goblins painted all with the object source lighting and the non-metallic metals, and even some fancy stuff on the floor, right, and not a whole lot of time. So if you could do me a favor, maybe drop a like on this video, that would be good. YouTube sees that and they say, oh, somebody likes this, let's maybe show it to somebody else too. And if you haven't subscribed, maybe if you want to subscribe, then you'll know when the next video like this is added to the channel. But in any case, I do want to say thank you so much for watching, and also too thanks to all the folks that have subscribed and liked the videos, and also have joined me on the Patreon page. And maybe also too, we might even see you on Twitch. So thanks again, everybody, and I'll catch you on the next video.